Tonight at 10, the Duchess of Sussex launches a scathing attack on the Mail on Sunday after winning her High Court privacy battle. Meghan accuses the paper of illegal and dehumanising practices after a 2-year fight over the publication of a letter she wrote to her estranged father. The Duchess said the Mail on Sunday had blatantly exploited her privacy by publishing the letter after her wedding. The newspaper group said it was surprised and disappointed by the judgment. Also on the programme tonight, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Almost 250,000 people in England have now been waiting more than a year for routine treatment on the NHS.
I've been put on antidepressants because of it. And I just don't know what the future holds now, because I don't know how long I'm going to be waiting for the operation.
Researchers discover that combining 2 drugs and using them for people who are seriously ill with COVID could cut deaths by up to a half. 10 years to the day since the fall of Egypt's President Mubarak, we assess the past decade under military rule. And looking for love in lockdown, how more and more people are searching for soulmates online.
And coming up in sport on BBC News, just over a week after their 9-0 defeat, Southampton reached the last 8 of the FA Cup with a 2-0 win at Wolves.
Good evening. Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, has won her 2-year legal battle with the Mail on Sunday over the publication of a letter she wrote to her estranged father, Thomas Markle, after her wedding to Prince Harry. Today, the High Court ruled that the Duchess had had a reasonable expectation that the letter would remain private. In a statement, she thanked the court for holding the newspaper to account and said the damage the paper had done and continued to do runs deep. Associated Newspapers, the publishers of the Daily Mail, Mail on Sunday and Mail Online, said they were surprised and disappointed by the judgment. This report from our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell contains flash photography.
This is a significant victory for the Duchess of Sussex. Meghan, strongly supported by her husband Prince Harry, has shown herself to be absolutely determined, robustly to defend her right to privacy. This case began after the Mail on Sunday published lengthy extracts from a letter she'd written in late 2018 to her estranged father, Thomas. Meghan's lawyers had told the High Court that the letter was a heartfelt plea from an anguished daughter. They'd applied for something called a summary judgment. That's a judgment without a full trial, on the basis, they said, that the Mail on Sunday had no real prospect of success. And the judge agreed. Mr. Justice Warby examined the evidence and found, taken as a whole, the disclosures published by the newspaper were manifestly excessive and hence unlawful. There is no prospect that a different judgment would be reached after a trial, he said. Meghan has also won on the separate issue of copyright infringement, but privacy is the one that really counts. In a statement, she spoke about what she said were the tactics of the Mail Group's newspapers. For these outlets, it's a game, she said. For me and so many others, it's real life, real relationships, and very real sadness. The damage they have done and continue to do runs deep. The Mail on Sunday's publishers said they were very surprised by the judgment. They said they would decide in due course whether to lodge an appeal. And first reaction from media lawyers.
This is a significant victory because of who she is. The Mail had published a series of articles around Meghan and her life and her private life. And I think this was the tipping point for her. I suspect that it should have quite a sobering impact on sections of the media who think that celebrities and members of the royal family are fair game.
For the Queen and the other senior royals, there will be great relief. The prospect of a full trial on the privacy issue, in which Meghan Markle and her father, Thomas Markle, would have been pitted against each other as the star witnesses, has been averted.
And Nick joins me now, and it really is quite a victory for the Duchess, a judgment that many thought could go either way.
This is absolutely game, set and match, a significant and considerable victory for the Sussexes. And yes, this was a big gamble to take on a big newspaper group, and it has absolutely paid off. I'm sure the rest of the family are pleased for them. It's a sharp warning to the media, but I think their overwhelming feeling will be one of relief. I mean, can you imagine how this could have played out if it had gone to a full trial? Meghan Markle being cross-examined in the witness box, Thomas Markle across the court appearing for the Mail on Sunday, all the strains within that family playing out in public. The Mail on Sunday, Associated Newspapers, say they are disappointed that they've been denied the chance to test the evidence in court. They say they may appeal, but this is a very careful, a very detailed 50-page judgment by Mr. Justice Warby, and he is very specific on the question of the privacy of the letter. He says, as I mentioned in the report, there is no prospect that a different judgment will be reached after a trial. Now, there is one technical issue over copyright still to be decided. There is another matter still to be decided. That's the question of damages. This is a pretty salutary day, I would suggest, for sections of the British media.
Nick Witchell, thank you. Almost 250,000 people in England have now waited more than a year for routine hospital treatment, operations like hip and knee replacements. Surgeons say without the treatment they need, many people are being left in limbo, reliant on painkillers. The pandemic has taken a huge toll on millions of people who need NHS treatment. In total, more than 4.5 million were waiting to start treatment in December, the highest figure since records began 14 years ago. But what is really stark is that difference between the numbers waiting for more than a year, as I said, almost 250,000 now, compared to just before the start of the pandemic in December 2019, when there were fewer than 1,500 people who have been waiting that long. And the reason for the wait? Hospitals have been swamped with COVID patients. There were almost 102,000 people being treated for COVID in hospital last month alone. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes has the details.
For 15 months, this has been Helen Bootland's life. Just 46, she's waiting for surgery on both knees. Off work and in constant pain, with no end in sight.
Just stuck at home every single day now. I'm housebound, essentially. I just don't go anywhere now. So I've gone from being a really active person to zero. Well, my anxiety levels are sky high at the moment. I suffered really badly right at the beginning, so I've been put on antidepressants because of it. And I just don't know what the future holds now, because I don't know how long I'm going to be waiting for the operation.
Despite the pressures of the pandemic, the NHS in England did manage to carry out more than 6 million operations last year. Doctors have stressed repeatedly that anyone with health concerns should still seek help. But still, some patients needing, for example, heart surgery, are facing long waits.
There's a tenfold increase in the number of patients who've waited more than a year for their heart procedure. I don't see procedures like balloon stents, pacemakers, or even heart surgery as a luxury.
So what are the implications of those long waits?
It means that with time, there is certainly a risk that people will deteriorate waiting, get heart failure they could have avoided, or even die.
Clearing the backlog of delayed operations and treatments will be a huge task. But NHS leaders say doctors need the freedom to decide how it will be done.
There will be people who've been waiting less than 52 weeks who we also need to prioritise. So what we really need to do, which is where the NHS is best, is effectively let our local clinicians make those prioritisation decisions and effectively say what's the order in which we should get through these backlogs.
There is some encouraging news, as cancer care seems to have been less affected. The number of patients seen and treated in December was in line with the months before the pandemic struck. David Hawkins was diagnosed late in 2019 and counts himself lucky his treatment continued through the COVID crisis.
Whether or not I'd have actually been struggling to get to see a doctor if it had been later on, and then I wouldn't have got a diagnosis. So in that way I class myself very lucky, but it's been difficult for everybody.
Across the UK, exhausted staff face a huge backlog of delayed treatments. The legacy of this virus will last for years. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
Well, the latest government figures show a small rise in new coronavirus cases since yesterday. 13,494 new infections were recorded in the latest 24-hour period. An average of 15,171 new cases were recorded per day in the last week. The number of people in hospital with coronavirus across the UK has fallen to 25,621, the lowest it has been since New Year's Eve. The number of deaths has fallen too. 678 deaths were reported in the past 24 hours. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. 754 deaths were announced on average every day in the past week. The total number is now 115,529. As for the vaccination programme, more than 450,000 people had a first dose of one of the 3 approved COVID-19 vaccines in the last 24-hour period. So more than 13.5 million people have now had their first jab. Well, more than half of the people who have died in England during the pandemic were disabled. New figures from the Office for National Statistics show that more than 30,000 people who died with coronavirus between January and November had a disability. Nikki Fox reports.
Disbelief, the overwhelming feeling. I'm in your flat and you are everywhere, but not here.
A poem written in grief. Andrea's sister Kath died last November after she caught coronavirus. She was 49.
It spreads so easily. My sister was at home. She never went anywhere. She got it and died.
A huge sci-fi fan, Kath had many passions. And then the pandemic hit, so she stayed home to stay safe.
Unless you've got a person with disabilities in your family, people don't realise just how fragile people's lives can be. Sometimes I think people think, oh, well, they're disabled. They're not having much life anyway. But they do, you know.
Today's findings highlight just how devastating the pandemic has been for disabled people, and the findings are bleak. 6 out of 10 people who have died were disabled. They are up to 2.9 times more likely to die than those without a disability.
They don't start with a very good state of affairs. They are more dependent, more excluded, and guess what? Sadly, they're more likely to experience this illness. Time and time again, disabled people have been an afterthought.
Just some of the thousands of disabled people who have lost their lives since the start of the pandemic. The government says it recognises the virus has had a disproportionate impact on the millions of people living with a disability and is taking steps to protect them. Andrea doesn't want her sister's death to be another statistic.
The sun has set for the day whilst I've been sitting here. It will rise again tomorrow. My heart is heavy, knowing that it will not rise again for you.
Nikki Fox, BBC News.
A drug that is normally given to people with arthritis could help COVID patients. A major trial shows that when tocilizumab is combined with the steroid dexamethasone, it can cut by up to half the number of COVID patients dying in hospital. As our medical editor Fergus Walsh reports, the trials were carried out here in the UK.
Searching among existing medicines for any that can treat COVID has been a huge task. First, there was dexamethasone. Now there's tocilizumab. Together, they can dramatically improve survival for patients on oxygen.
Compared with a year ago, when we really did not know how to treat this disease, we now have 2 treatments. They both act on the immune system, dexamethasone and tocilizumab. Put them together and we reduce the risk of death by a third or even as much as a half in the sickest patients. That's great news.
Dexamethasone, a steroid, costs just £5, whereas the arthritis drug tocilizumab at least £500 per patient. But that's still far less than the £2,000 a day cost of being in ICU.
This therapy looks like it keeps people out of the intensive care unit, so they never need to meet people like me, which can only be a good thing. So as well as improving survival, it actually will decrease the number of people who need to come to intensive care, which is fabulous.
There's understandably a huge focus on preventing coronavirus and vaccines. But for those with COVID, it is treatments like dexamethasone and tocilizumab which will save lives now.
And they need the research, so I just signed up for them.
Lawrence spent several days in intensive care at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, but now has his bags packed, ready to go home. He's one of tens of thousands of COVID patients taking part in NHS trials.
If nobody's willing to try, you're back to square one again, aren't you? Nobody's going to do anything.
Last month, NHS hospitals treated more than 100,000 COVID patients. That's around 1 in 3 of all those admitted since the pandemic began. COVID remains a brutal disease, but the chances of surviving it are improving. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has announced plans to restructure the NHS in England, saying health and care services need to be more integrated and responsive with less bureaucracy. The move is set to reverse many controversial changes introduced almost a decade ago when David Cameron was Prime Minister. But Labour questioned the timings of the changes during the pandemic, saying staff were exhausted. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has more.
The pandemic response has required everyone to work together, the NHS, local and national governments, delivering the vaccination programme and other huge tasks. Now ministers want the same for services in England after COVID.
The pandemic has made the changes in this white paper more, not less, urgent.
We have long argued for more integrated care, but how will these new structures be governed? How will they be accountable to local people?
The plans involve legislation to bring NHS organisations together with local government service providers to focus on what people in their areas need. One example's in West Yorkshire. Here in Halifax, a community hub offers food and support to the disadvantaged. And NHS staff are also on hand to deal with any health issues.
I think it's really important that we deliver services to these vulnerable groups that don't fit into your normal NHS pathways. You can't expect somebody who's got no money, no way of transport to go to a hospital, to go to a health centre.
Ben has been sleeping rough and feels he does get the help he needs.
It's hard because you feel like giving up because there's no options, but this place gives you an option and gives you a fighting chance.
Told your GP that you were attending here.
Local leaders say it's all made possible by joined-up working between the NHS and local councils.
By being available as healthcare services in places where people may have to go socially or to get comfort and support, you can then start to join up care around the needs of the person.
The plans will scrap reforms introduced in England by the coalition under David Cameron with Health Secretary Andrew Lansley. That involved putting contracts out to tender and more private sector involvement and competition. Now the buzzword will be collaboration, but health analysts say that'll be harder than it sounds.
The benefits to patients of integrated care can take some time. And just because you allow people to work together more freely doesn't mean to say they will work together and collaborate across services. So I don't think this is necessarily going to be a panacea for suddenly increased patient benefit, but hopefully what it will do is just remove some of the obstacles that were in the way.
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have all embarked on integrated health and social care. It hasn't always been straightforward. The challenge now in England is to make a real difference to people's lives. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
A serial sex offender has been found guilty of raping and murdering a 21-year-old student from Hull University. Libby Squire was attacked last February and her body was dumped in a river. Her killer, a Polish father of 2, was convicted after 27 hours of deliberations by a jury at Sheffield Crown Court. Danny Savage reports.
Libby Squire, a 21-year-old from Buckinghamshire who was studying at Hull University. She was murdered by a man stalking the student area looking for a victim. On a freezing cold night in January 2019, Libby, marked by the green arrow, was heading to a nightclub with friends. But she was refused entry because she was drunk. She's put in a taxi, but later gets out and goes her own way, crossing the path of a man called Pavel Relevich, shown by the red arrow. He follows her before he makes his move. He wasn't trying to help. He was a predator. A few minutes later, he persuades her to get into his car and takes her to a nearby park. Relevich drove Libby to this lonely spot. They then both got out of the car before he sexually assaulted and killed her. This tidal river runs down one side of the park. He then pushed her body into it to try and cover up his crime. It would be weeks before Libby was found.
It was such a long period when nobody really knew what had happened to her. There was 7 weeks between when she disappeared and when tragically her body was found at sea. So all sorts of theories were circulating, and it caused a lot of panic in Hull amongst the student community.
After today's guilty verdicts, Libby's parents paid tribute to her outside court.
As a family, today's verdict changes nothing for us. There is no closure. We don't get to have Libby back, and our lives don't revert back to normal. Libby will always be with us, and we are all so proud of our beautiful, caring, wonderful girl. And although she has been physically taken from us, the memories we have and the love we share will never be taken.
Relevich, who was married and a father, had been committing sexual offences for months before the attack and is already serving a sentence for voyeurism. Libby Squire's murder terrified a community and devastated her family. They now have to carry on without a daughter and sister who loved life. Danny Savage, BBC News, Hull.
BBC World Television has been banned from broadcasting in China. Beijing has been critical of the BBC's coverage of the coronavirus outbreak and of the treatment of the country's ethnic Uyghurs. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the move was an unacceptable curtailing of media freedoms. Firefighters are tackling a huge blaze on Dartmoor this evening. These pictures were filmed from about a mile away. Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue say they have 5 appliances near the scene, a few miles northeast of Tavistock, but can't reach the blaze because of its remote location. The Irish Prime Minister has called on the European Union and the UK to cool it in their post-Brexit dealings amid fears Ireland could be collateral damage in the process. It follows a tense few weeks between the EU and the UK over coronavirus vaccine supply and the Northern Ireland Protocol, part of the Brexit agreement designed to prevent a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Fergal Keane sent this report from Dublin.
They're remembering the centenary of Ireland's guerrilla war for independence here, but the age of martyrs is long gone in the Republic.
Taoiseach, how are you?
Still, the Taoiseach knows this could be a critical moment in the story of the peace process. And that's what's prompted this message to British and EU leaders.
I just worry a bit about the post-Brexit noise from EU member states towards Britain and vice versa.
What would you say to your European...
I'll tell one or two of them that they need to dial it down. This isn't an ongoing sort of battle between UK and some of the bigger beasts of Europe. They need to cool it. And we'll be collateral damage and all of that.
Britain wants a 2-year extension to the grace period for the Northern Ireland Protocol. But Mr Martin told me it had to be limited.
Does that mean weeks, months, years?
It is modest. It can't be a year, for example. So it would be.
So that would definitely be a time frame.
Yeah.
That it has to happen within a year.
In my view, yeah.
This intervention comes amid heightened tension over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Staff implementing checks at the ports of Larne and Belfast were temporarily withdrawn after worries about their safety. There are growing unionist fears that EU customs checks have created a border between Northern Ireland and Britain. The atmosphere is potentially volatile.
You can see how it can tip over very quickly, and therefore we have to be very, very vigilant that it doesn't.
Because one of the big fears is that the loyalist paramilitaries are given a new lease of life, and that we could see violence, sectarian violence coming back. Is that something that worries you?
If we handle this the wrong way, and if things are handled wrongly, you could provoke that response. But I don't think loyalism wants that.
Modern Irish politics emerged from civil war, division, a partitioned island. But 100 years and many thousands of lost lives later, some opinion polls suggest growing support in Northern Ireland for a referendum on reuniting Ireland, anathema to many Protestants.
So here are these two great portraits.
Absolutely.
In his office, Micheál Martin has portraits of two revolutionary comrades who ended up as bitter enemies. His sense of history says holding a border poll anytime soon would be a mistake.
If we just see this as a simple numerical majoritarian issue, we're going backwards, not forward. I don't believe the future of the island of Ireland is about majoritarianism in the crudest sense. I think it's about consensual relationships, trust.
Micheál Martin is a product of Ireland's complex history. His grandfather rebelled against the British, but an uncle fought for Britain in World War II. He wants a reinvigorated Anglo-Irish relationship.
It's a very important relationship, and it's a strong relationship, notwithstanding the difficulties of Brexit and the challenges it presents. I'm very passionate about it. You know, I've witnessed the transformation of the British-Irish relationship and the degree to which it underpinned the progress on Ireland and the peace process. But more than that, you know, I have first cousins in the UK. We are very close, whether we like it or not.
In Dublin, the determination is to try to de-escalate the tensions that have come with Brexit, and quickly. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Dublin.
10 years ago today, Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak was forced from office after weeks of demonstrations in Cairo. It was a seismic moment in the Middle East and helped encourage other uprisings across the region. But hopes that people power would transform Egypt were short-lived. The military seized control and have imposed a much tougher police state than the one Mubarak led. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, looks at the decade that's followed Mubarak's fall.
Nobody who was there will forget it. The night Egypt's president, Hosni Mubarak, stepped down and Tahrir Square in Cairo erupted. It took just 18 days of protest, danger and death to remove a president who'd been an immovable fixture in the Middle East since the 1980s.
The people have taken on a brutal police state and overthrown an authoritarian leader who appeared to be in control. Their achievement will change the Middle East.
It did. But not in the way that the people who cleaned up the square the next morning, symbolically reclaiming their country, were hoping. Mohammed Suleiman, now a political analyst in Washington, was a 19-year-old protester.
We did believe that this is the moment in history where Arab people could finally be free and be the master of their own fate.
But Egypt's revolution lacked leaders. More powerful forces did not. Mohamed Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood's candidate for president, beat the militaries. As Egypt lurched between crises, the generals seized power back in 2013. At least 2,500 people, almost all civilians, many of them Muslim Brotherhood supporters, were killed in the next 7 months.
In the last couple of minutes, there was fire into the wall just above where we were. All this is a sign of the danger on the streets in Cairo, about the divided nature of society.
The president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, a former general, has jailed tens of thousands of opponents of his regime. Among them, members of this family, prominent human rights campaigners. Alaa Abdel Fattah was tortured during years in Sisi's jails. He is still a prisoner, along with his sister Sanaa. Another sister, Mona, live-streamed this video after Sanaa was arrested. Both women were beaten. Their mother, Leila Soueif, says it's much worse for thousands of other Egyptians.
Worse than under Mubarak? much worse now than Mubarak. All of these things that I'm saying used to happen during Mubarak's time, but the scale is completely different.
Is there something that the West should be doing now?
I know that Western politicians are selling their people the line that they have to back similar regimes around the area because this is the only way to achieve stability. Now, this is their alibi. It's not true. British people should hold their government accountable for what it's doing, for how it's, working for the benefit of arms and energy companies rather than people.
In Cairo and across the Middle East, millions don't want another decade of upheaval. They want jobs. Young people drove the 2011 uprisings, angry about corruption, repression and unemployment, still the highest in the world. In Egypt, a third of under 30s are jobless. The old grievances of 2011 still exist, but the hope has been crushed. History shows that repression works until desperation overcomes fear, and then it doesn't. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
And finally, life has changed in so many ways in this pandemic, from the way people work and communicate to the way people are looking for love. It's not easy when you're in lockdown. Our correspondent Daniela Ralph has been speaking to people who have been virtual dating.
Waiting for your online blind date to show up. Meet John. It may now be virtual, but it's just as tense. And this is Pippa.
Hiya, how you doing? You all right?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Matched up via a dating app, the chat is of lockdown.
Are you doing lots of interesting cooking in lockdown?
I do cook, but I wouldn't say I'm Mr. Gordon Ramsay.
As with John and Pippa, video dating has become the norm in lockdown. The traffic on dating apps has been up throughout the past year, with many businesses adapting to focus on hosting these virtual meetups.
The ultimate chemistry test is in person, but you can pick up on some of those vibes before, and it will save you a lot of time if you try a video date first.
Simon and Shanna are a lockdown love story. They managed 3 in-person dates and then came lockdown in March. Forced apart, they bonded over weeks of video dating and walks in the park. In December, they got engaged.
It's a really intense time to fall in love with somebody. Do you think there is strength in that?
I think you have strength through adversity. Getting through that together and being each other's support system has really cemented, not just how we feel, but how we'll get through the future struggles.
Yeah, if you can see someone at their worst during lockdown, you know you can survive it.
And back to John and Pippa. Was there a happy ending?
How did it go with John? Is there going to be a second date?
I think it went very well with John. I personally don't think there's going to be a second date, but he was an absolutely lovely guy. I just don't think we have very much in common.
She seemed like a nice girl. She was easy to get along with and, kind of speak to. The attraction's not there. You have to be honest with yourself.
Love in lockdown can be hard to find. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
And that's it from us now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Good night.